Hey guys, somebody who clearly doesn't value their time here, and today I want to go over my 3.28 patch notes wish list. This is basically like if I were to design the patch for 3.28, what it would look like. That's with all of these support gem changes, some mechanical changes, skill gem changes, tons of skill gem changes, ascendancy changes, and then various tree changes. I didn't have time to get to things like uniques or even the bloodline ascendancies, but this was already just so much that I couldn't possibly finish it. And speaking of which, this is going to be a really long video. If you just want to see the patch notes, feel free to check out the video description, the YouTube video. It'll have a link to these patch notes that I'm going over right now without having to like listen to me go through all of it painstakingly individually or whatever, right? But this is gonna be a long video, so it's gonna be split over across multiple things. And since it's so long, I'm not gonna edit this in any way, so it's gonna be pretty sloppy. So apologize in advance for that. But without further ado, let's get right into the slop. So high level, I personally don't care about skills being like perfectly balanced or anything remotely approaching that. Honestly, I'm kind of fine if it's out of whack. Mostly what I want, especially as someone who's played the game a lot, I just want skills that have not been good for a really long time to actually see some like time in the sun, right? And then skills that have been good for a long time to maybe take a backseat for a bit. Because basically, there have been skills that have been good for like almost a decade at this point, and there's been skills that have been bad for like 5+ years. And I kind of want to see that change. So my high level on this whole patch notes is basically, I think AoE skills have kind of been left behind projectile supports. I think around the bow rework, we got a bunch of proj support on the tree. I would like to see something similar for AoE skills, like with various things like more AoE, base radius increases to things, and just kind of see what happens if we give AoE the same kind of support instead of like just projectiles having so much time in limelight, which is funny to say after a league where Penance Brand is really popular. But anyways, I also think there are a lot of offensive things that are like pretty poor right now, like offensive auras, for example. Like holy shit, is anger bad and zealotry and stuff like that. But it's like I think all of the offensive auras need to be buffed. When we did the defensive rework, the defensive auras were really great for a long time, and now they're just like kind of medium, but they're still good. Where the offensive auras, it's really hard to ever justify actually using them, which I do think is a problem. It's like generally I'm gonna be spending most of my auras on defenses anyway, but it would still be nice to actually have the option. I think the vast majority of spells are terrible, and similar with bows. Like when you can, people say like, oh, spells are fine because they rattle off like all the spells that are good, which is not very many, but like Penance Brand's great. And then some various things with mines are okay. And then you have skills like Ball Lightning Orbiting, Volatile Bed. And you really kind of struggle to think of like the next good spells after that because there's just really not a lot. And then bows, it's similar. It's like you can like see people play Lightning Arrow, great clearing skill. Same with Tornado Shot if you want to make like some Glass Headhunter character. And then like one of the more decent single target options are things like Elemental Hit of the Spectrum. And then you really run into just like, what are the other good bow skills? And it's like, well, it's pretty tough. And on top of that, I think spells have it the worst because I think spells also have the problem of, well, they don't have mana leech. So it's like the mana cost of the skills are just far too high. And it's really hard for them to actually sustain their mana. I think mana regen probably needs to get increased, which I did not address here. But I think base lowering the mana cost of all spells by like around 30% would probably do a lot. Otherwise, you're relying on things like Eldritch Battery or mana regen from Lightning Galling buffing on like Elementalist or something to actually like be able to cast your spells. Because while attacks and like various attacks can scale their attack speed as much as they want, casters really get into that. They scale the cast speed too much, then their mana becomes a problem kind of thing, which other archetypes don't really have to deal with. I also think the Ranger and Shadow section of the tree is just really, really bad defensively. It's really easy to get one shot on that side of the tree, and I would like to have things either address that or give different forms of defense to kind of mitigate that. Okay, so I've just broken out in things like support gems and then spell skill gems and then bow gems and then non-bow gems and stuff like that, just like so. We're going to start with support gems first. I want to change Arrow Nova support to be Nova support. Basically just what PoE 2 did with Nova support. It's basically, well, before it got nerfed, it makes projectile fire 4 additional projectiles and you fire them in all directions. You still have a less damage penalty. It might be a little bit higher than Arrow Nova support because it is more generic. It could be something like the GMP penalty. I could also see making an argument for just adding Nova support in addition to Arrow Nova support, where Arrow Nova support is for bows and then Nova support is for non-bow projectile skills. But I kind of like just having it as one thing better just because you don't have to have some like really clunky wording, like you can't have both Novas on it or something like that. I think Blasphemy support should be buffed pretty heavily. Curses, just in general, using with Blasphemy is just like incredibly rare outside of like Aura bots these days or Curse bots, because that penalty that you get on less effective supported curses makes them quite bad. Like, for example, if you're using Blasphemy support plus Enfeeble, it will take that like 21% reduced damage taken from enemies down to like 10, like 12ish%. essentially halving it, meaning why would I ever do this? And that's generally how people treat it. They just don't really use it. So I think if we want to actually have the curses be effective, I think we can increase the mana reservation cost of it while still maintaining that the curses actually do something useful for you. So this will turn this into another option for a defensive curse. You're probably not going to be supporting this with like offensive curses, but defensive curses like could go a pretty long way with blasphemy changing like this. Blind support. This support gem used to be better back when blind used to just be a global 50% chance to evade attacks. But then blind got changed to less accuracy on enemies a while ago, and the support gem never got changed. It was 10% chance to blind, which is awful. So I'm changing this to 100%. And I think you could alternatively, if you don't want it to be abused by things that are triggering it, which I think is kind of fine, you could change it to something like Fortify, where you want it to be in the main skill, where it's like cannot be supported by triggered skills, 20% more damage against blind enemies, 20% more blind effect. Essentially, you can give it a support to use this to make your character slightly more defensive if you want to do that. Blood support, just making it work for things that are not attacks. So if you have some weird way to bleed with an attack, your spells could also benefit from this. Cast while channeling. This support gem and its Awaken variant is completely terrible. The only time that you actually use this is when you have insane gear where you could actually use this as a damage skill, but generally just going to be using it as utility. Things like Cast while channeling Desecrate or something for like an offering, or Cast while channeling some kind of thing to like use as a utility, whereas this used to be a skill you could use in your main damage setup. I want to just basically remove the support skills do less damage. I think this is nonsense on a skill that, or a support gem that you're already giving up that is going to make your skill trigger 3 times a second, which is really slow, and have a massive damage penalty and cost another skill gem. It's just like, this is so bad in its current state. I don't know that this is actually enough to make this usable, honestly. I think it actually might need a more multiplier on it, because you're already giving up another skill gem support. Like compared to Cast on Crit, this is like 35% of it, like as it current stands. Anyways, cluster trap support. Traps are in a pretty bad spot right now, particularly ones that are supported by trap support, so small buff here. A cold fire support, I think it's pretty interesting to do this, because otherwise you generally have to use a ring, which is, you either have to use a ring or you have to be Avatar of Fire. I think this opens up options for not having to use Pyre and not having to have Avatar of Fire. Just makes it a more generically usable support. Decay support, this doesn't deal damage, really. People use it with Stormburst sometimes to like actually get a more multiplier on the skill, or on the support gem. I think doubling the damage should be fine. Maybe open up another way to support the Chaos archetype. Devour support, I just think making this similar to like life tap support, where if someone actually wants to use this as sustain, that's a really big cost already. So you could just give it a 19% more damage support, so people can actually use it in their main links if they want this as a form of recovery. It's much like how you'll use life tap in your main support, even though it's not very good, but it makes it so you don't have to deal with mana cost. Or you use something like energy leech support, which is not very good, but it gives you energy leech at the cost of having a bigger, more multiplier gem. So much like the change here, I think energy leech support was gutted last league because of Trickster, or to make Trickster seem better in comparison, but I think we could just like undo a little bit of it and make it a little bit more consistent, where it's, instead of only getting the more damage while you're leeching energy shield, which is kind of hard to use outside of Trickster, but Trickster would never use it. Anyways, it's a nice utility skill that I don't think had to be changed, especially like right side of the tree builds where I'm most likely to use this, because they don't have access to something like this on attacks. Well, pretty much any attack where you want to have access to energy leech support early on, because later you can get it through uniques and cluster duels and stuff like that, but early on you just have no access to this. So I think it's totally fine like this, because this is you're already giving up something to use this. It's not great. Faster casting support, I think this gem is actually quite terrible, and generally is only going to be used on utilities or extremely early in progression. I kind of want to change that so it's a little bit more usable later in the league. So I had 60% increased cast speed for non-travel skills and 39% for travel skills. This basically means I don't want it to directly scale things like Frostblink and Wintry Blast or like Lightning Warp too hard, because they're already pretty decent, and I think buffing them doesn't make sense. But adding this to like give it as more of an option for late game scaling. Focus channeling support, I think it should just deal 20% more damage to supported skills initially, so you have to wait a second to get the 20% more. I think this support, as it currently stands, is pretty bad, because the only time you're going to be channeling a skill for more than a second consistently is when you're doing single target, or when you're using a skill like something like Cyclone, where I think using a channeled skill is already a pretty big downside, so I think it should be 20% more, and then the 40% remaining more can be spent over the multiple seconds. So it's just a more consistently decent skill gem. or support gem. Increase area effect. This is the first like pretty big change that I want to make, and this might have to get completely undone. We'll see if it went live like this. But basically, instead of being 50% increase area of effect, it is now going to be a 30% more area of effect, with Awakened version being 35% more. This might make things too big, but I kind of just want to see what happens with this. Increase area of effect support is also one of those skill gems that is, or support gems only really used for utility things, in very niche applications like things like Blade Blast to get the AoE a little bit bigger so the overlaps work. But the point is, I would like to see what this actually does. And see where bounce lies. If it needs to be nerfed or changed back, that's totally fine. But could change the game in a pretty interesting way. We'll see. Impending Doom support. This got completely gutted with the Spell Cascade rework, and it never really recovered. Impending Doom support is now only used in Forbidden Chacos, and then in this latest patch when the Foulborn Unique gave a level 30 version of it. But the base gem is just not really usable. You can use it with Ignite, which is kind of comfy, but a low damage setup. This was one of the best casts and only self-cast skills that was being actually used in the league like in the league before it got nerfed. So I would like to see this undone, honestly. And just if it's too good, we can nerf it again. But it basically removed an entire support gem, or like, well, it's a support gem, but it's a skill gem. Basically removed Impending Doom from the game. And I would like to see that undone because it's a pretty fair archetype and honestly not that strong. It's just like, but people really love it. One of my only almost hundreds. Impale support, another pretty drastic change. I want this to be now supports all skills that hit enemies, previously just attacks. I have tree changes that are similar to this, but I see no reason for this not to support physical spells or spells that deal physical damage. Knockback support, 100% chance to knockback, previously 44%, and then quality is now increased knockback distance. This is a pretty drastic buff for this, but this support gem is completely terrible, so I think this is fine to do. I think being able to knock back something in RPGs and in games in general is very fun, and there are really weird ways to build around it. I don't think this is going to inherently break anything at all. It just is inherently fair because you're already doing something that's not damage, so it's just a weird effect that can be fun to mess around with, and you can actually use it for more damage on some various things, but we'll see where that works. I also have a mechanical change where knockback is now allowed on uniques and rares, because currently that is not possible. At least I know it's not on uniques. I actually don't remember if you can do it on rares or not. But anyways, Locust 9 cannot deny with 1.5 meters, previously 3. Locust Mine is very strong, but it is also very, very clunky in the current state of the game. It will still be clunky with this, but there are times where you just like can't detonate these, and it makes it really frustrating to use, and it just makes the skill even more clunky than it already needs to be, where it's like Locust Mine is basically not used anymore, outside of the Power Siphon, because Power Siphon was drastically nerfed with this because it was getting an attack speed buff rather than just a effectiveness change. But point being, this is an extremely underutilized support gem. I think it's very strong, so you have to be a little careful on how much you buff it, but with the inherent clunk in it, I think it's fine to just try this, and then if it's too strong, you can nerf it back or change the meters, but I don't think making the skill feel terrible is a great solution to making a skill this powerful work. I think it's more fun to just make it not feel terrible. Anyways, life leech support, similar to things like life tap and energy leech support. I see no reason why this can't just have a more damage while leeching, especially for spells that have trouble with sustain early on. This is just an option you could use, much like how you use Fortify in your links until you can get Fortify from another source. I have this non-triggered skills in here so that you can't automate it through some kind of trigger like Spellslinger or some kind of bow setup if we want to avoid that. I don't think it's necessary, but just in case. Living Lightning support, I don't know shit about minions, so you should not listen to me at all and anything I say about minions, but for my short time messing around with this Living Lightning skill, I thought this minion was cool as shit, but it felt like it basically didn't deal damage, so yeah, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it was really cool. It's just I don't know. It was so much fun. I was so excited to try it that I like hit stuff, and I'm going in Blood Aqueducts like a level 35 Living Lightning, and it's just not killing anything. So, anyways, Mana Forged Arrows. I think we could change this to have 2% more damage per 1 mana cost. People are generally going to be life tapping utility skills like this, or they're using it for utility and not damage, and they're not actually spending mana to get it to trigger. Where I think we should reward people for spending more mana to trigger it rather than how it's currently set up. The Indigon interaction is not like currently available to this, so I think this is a pretty fair thing to do, and I don't know that this would change much, but it would open up an easier way to scale big mana bows, which is a very under-supported archetype, so I don't think this hurts anything. Melee splash support, I'm just removing the less damage penalty to make it consistent with Tribal Fury. I don't know why this has a 40% less damage penalty on it. and the Awakened one has a smaller version of that, when Charl Fury in the tree has no penalty, unless that's like some hidden thing that I'm not aware of. I don't think this needs to exist. Using melee splash support is already an extremely steep cost, so I don't think it should have another penalty on it. Multiple trap support, similar to the other one, just buffing the trap archetype a little bit. Point blank support, this only worked with attacks previously. I'm changing it so that it works with all skills, so it can work with spells, and making it a little bit bigger than the 30% that it's that you would get from just taking point blank on the tree. This doesn't stack with that. That's how it currently works. But making it 40% more damage, that's pretty much the same amount of more multiplier you get in something like Conk Effect, where you're going to make the skill clear worse, but you're going to make the single target better, which is basically what Conk Effect does. So I think it should be a similar amount of more multiplier for that. I think it's pretty fair. Prismatic Burst support. This skill or support gem that gives the skill is truly awful. I don't know that this is enough to buff it, but I think we could try with this initially, just essentially double the proc rate. I think it could also have the condition where it can only deal damage of the chosen type removed entirely. Prismatic Burst support is a really interesting thing to do as a way to scale a build, but I was so excited when this support gem came out, and it has basically done nothing and could do nothing until hopefully now. It just doesn't deal remotely enough damage. And you could change the effectiveness on it too to make it deal more damage, but basically double the proc rate, see where it lies, maybe buff it even further after that. Rupture support, I just think this is a really niche archetype, but I think the more multiplier for going into this archetype could be buffed a little bit. Spellblade support, I think we could, it's a little clunky, but add something like 30% more added damage from rare melee weapons or even bigger amount. Because basically Spellblade support is used with uniques and things that scale infinitely like Energy Blade. Where I think if you want to have it used in like a more Spellblade style fashion where you have just like a big mace or big scepter or something like that, which is like I think like the thematic use case of it, I think you could make it better for that use case, which this would do. So, interesting. I think this could go a little bit higher, but I think Spellblade support is a very interesting thing. It's unfortunate that currently it's only really used with uniques and then things like Energy Blade. Okay, Awaken Spell Cascade. This is a massive change. I want Awaken Spell Cascade removed. I've basically want it removed from the game ever since it was introduced, because what happened was when Awaken Spell Cascade came out, skills that are usable with Awaken Spell Cascade, like for damage, are basically unusable until you get this. Not all of them, like Volatile Dead's an exception, but for the vast majority of them, like things like Storm Call, Absolution, as like not a minion skill, are basically just not good enough because the damage I think in a lot is balanced around having access to this. So they just remove Awaken Spell Cascade and bake it in the base gem. It would open up archetypes like I would never in a million years consider League starting something like Cold Snap of Power in the current PoE, even if you gave it like 50% more damage, because the skill just not going to feel good until you have Awaken Spell Cascade. So this just opens up things that you can like League start and basically just increases the viable spells like early on, and especially for people who are playing in SSF, which I know we don't balance around that, but that's just an added benefit. Because essentially, skills that are Awaken Cascadeable like don't exist to SSF players, which is very brutal. Anyways, trap support. Support skills now deal 10% more damage, previously 6% less. I think this could actually be buffed even further, but I kind of want to see what happens if you just do this now. Traps are significantly weaker than mines in the current state of the game. And by that, I particularly mean things that are supported by trap support as opposed to high impact mine support. Like the base trap skills are pretty decent. Like you have both explosive traps, you have ice traps, and stuff like that. Like those skills are okay, but like this, like you almost never would actually consider using trap support to support a spell or a bow. It just doesn't make sense outside of like dots, and then even then that's just not really good enough. So I think buffing this to make this archetype more playable, or maybe even making this a bigger more multiplier and making trap support traps just throw slower. I don't know. I want some way to make this archetype exist again, because right now it doesn't really, like at least trap support. Trauma, this was drastically nerfed around when Bone Shatter was reworked, and this was before the melee rework. If you look on PoE Ninja, you won't see very many people at all using trauma support. It's just not good enough anymore to justify an extreme build around that you have to do. I think trauma support is an entire archetype that was basically removed when trauma support was removed, which is unfortunate because it's the only way it's the only time characters are really built like that, and it's pretty interesting to like build your character around extreme physical mitigation so you don't kill yourself. I don't know if you're allowed to say that on YouTube, but anyways, yeah, this is basically unnerfing it back to its original form, but slightly less, and see where it lies. I don't think this will do too much. It will bring back an archetype that is basically removed from the game. So Unleash support, Unleash support is really strong for utility, but as a main damage source, it's not super powerful. So I think we could buff this, and this will make the Oshabi archetype that pairs with this a little bit stronger and open up some build options there. Vial Toxins, similar to that. This might be too much. It's like a 56% more multiplier if changed to this for archetypes that can support it. Basically, if you're playing a spell that can just incidentally poison, like if you're playing like Blazing Salvo and you have like some added chaos damage from somewhere and an incidental chance to poison, you could just use Vial Toxin support. Pretty niche scenario, but basically anything where you can just like incidentally poison something, even if you're not a poison archetype, is a good use case to use this. I think it's a little too strong on archetypes like Mana Forged Arrows, but I think that's kind of okay because bows are not very strong right now anyway. Might have to change this later, but because you could automate poison essentially. Okay, so now going on to actual spells. Like I mentioned earlier, baseline, I want to lower all mana cost spells by about 30%. You could even consider doing it even further for skills like Solar into the Spiral, but I think part of that skill's design is that it costs ability mana. But anyways, it's just far too much. And I don't have this shown in these numbers below, but essentially all of these skills that are getting buffed by like any percentage, the base damage of the spell is also going to be buffed by an equivalent amount. Like if Absolution and Absolution Inspiring, let's say these did 500 damage right now and they go up to 300% effectiveness, they would essentially do 750 physical damage afterwards. So just similar, 50% buff to the base amount of skill. I'm going to go through these. Basically, I'm going to say Tiny, which is like 0 to like 15%, and then 20% to like 30% would be Small, and then 40% to 50 or 35% to 50% would be like a medium buff, and then large would be like 60 to 80, and then just like I'll say double. Like I'm trying to just make like a keyway so I can say it without like having to go all once, because I'm not going to change all these mechanically, right? Like our Arc of Oscillating is just doubled. This skill sucks. Doesn't deal damage. Mechanically, it's not very good. Doubling is totally fine. Arc of Surging, this used to be an entire build around where you, well, not even build around, like a play style that was very PoE 2 coded, where you put down a Hydrosphere and then you split off the Hydrosphere to deal all your damage to a single target, and then you're clearing. You just play it like normal Arc. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, and once that Hydrosphere interaction was removed, the skill was removed from the game. Nobody plays the skill anymore. There's no reason to. I think it could come back, and then you could have splits deal 30% less damage or something like that to just make it more fair, or even splits off of splits against single target deal list. I don't know. You can maybe word it more clunky to make it so it doesn't hurt your clear too much, but I think this is totally fine. This playstyle, like deal damage every 1 second, is very unique. There are very few builds that actually play like that. So I think bringing it back, even if it's like almost essentially hard coded to work with Hydrosphere, is totally fine. Arc, I didn't quite double the damage of the skill. Somewhere like around like 75% more. And then I removed the chain that you get from quality and then instead gave it a 0 to 20% increased chaining range in quality. Arc a while ago had its chaining range removed, like around when Poet's Pen was nerfed. This is like around when I started playing. And Arc's been pretty bad ever since. I don't want to say completely unusable, because there are always use cases like Arc Ignite's like really good at like Legion clearing, but the skill doesn't deal damage. It's just an atrociously damaged skill in the game. Like it just doesn't deal anything. But I think it could have a weird, not even a weird, just like an interesting use case in like a really big chaining skill. So if you had quality chaining range to the quality, you can pick up more chaining range on the tree, or you can use things like Ashes of the Stars to really stretch how far this thing can actually hit and make it like really arc across the screen, which would be pretty interesting. I don't want to buff Val Arc too much. I'm buffing a lot of the Val skills by a ton. Val Arc is already pretty decent, at least at buffing your Arc, and then also in things like Arc Ignite. Armageddon Brand, normal one, just more damage with hits than it previously had. Armageddon Brand Volatility, large buff to the skill, and doing something weird here. I don't know how to make this skill function properly, but basically you need to have a lot of brand limit to use this skill at all. And then it has to attach and then hit and then go away. But if you put like 5 brands out, it'll attack. Like essentially, you can't scale your cast speed with the skill, because if you scale your cast speed too much, you'll have too many brands out, and then they'll never attach, they'll never deal damage. I don't know if the skill needs a complete rework, but I think if you change it to have like infinite number of brands attached to an enemy or something like that, like I have 5 right here, it could maybe work where you're actually able to scale it like a normal skill. Because right now, there's no way to use this skill. You could technically use it as Ignite, but it's just not even really that good for that. Its effectiveness is just not nearly big enough, and it's not comfy enough to actually play. So I don't know. Skill needs a massive change, and maybe this would be enough to do it, but I'm unsure. Blade Blasted Dagger Detonation, normal buff, medium buff. Blade Fall, medium buff. Blade Fall Volleys, double damage. Blade Fall Volleys deals less damage than Blade Fall because additional volleys on Blade Fall make it deal less damage. That's just how the skill works. It has increased crit chance as opposed to just better damage. I think this skill needs a pretty massive buff if you want to actually justify its use case. Blade Fall of Impaling, also doubling the damage. This is a really, really cool skill. It has guaranteed impale, but it only deals impale on crit. And to do that, you basically need to have an Ungol's Harmony, which means it's not really a great like SSF build early. But once you have that, then you essentially just have a spell that impales, which does not deal a lot of damage. So it definitely needs its damage at least doubled because its skill just doesn't hit nearly enough. But I think you could also do Critical Strike Multiplier instead applies the impale effect for the skill, because especially if you're not using Ungol's Harmony or something like that, you're going to pick up Incidental Crit Multi, which is going to do nothing for you, which is going to make the skill feel or just not deal remotely enough damage. But if you instead make it so Crit Multiplier applies the impale effect, that could help mitigate some of that. This number might need to be higher. I know this is still probably not enough to make the skill good enough, but I've trouble buffing a skill much more than 100% because it's like that's ridiculous. But I think these skills definitely need it. Brand Surge, similar to that. I think the skill's damage should be doubled, but I'm only giving a large buff, like a 50% more, because I don't know if people would like the way that the skill plays. It's just kind of weird. It's just like a little clunky. I think it's really cool and chunky, but I don't want to buff skills too much to use it so where like people feel like I have to play that because it deals so much damage. So I think this is a reasonable place to start. Probably needs more than this realistically. Ball Lightning and Ball Lightning of Static, minor buff. These skills are already pretty decent. Ball Lightning is not very decent, but people still seem to use it a decent amount. Ball Lightning of Orbiting is already great, and it's just kind of a better version of this. So I don't know how you make Ball Lightning different than Ball Lightning of Orbiting without making one of them just better, because they basically do the same thing. I don't know. It's tough one to balance. Bane, large to almost double damage buff. Skill doesn't deal damage. Bane of Condemnation, similar. Blazing Salvo, small buff to the hit damage, small buff to the cast time, which ends up being like overall like a smallish to medium buff. I don't want to buff it to the effectiveness too much. It's already a good skill to trigger, so using the cast time to prevent a little bit of that, as opposed to just buffing the effectiveness straight up. Blight, medium buff. Blight of Atrophy, medium buff. I would say medium. This is like 60% more, so it's like a largest buff. Blight of Contagion, smaller buff, and then Vol Blight, also smaller buff. Nothing super interesting there. Contagion. Contagion's basically doubling the damage. These skills don't deal damage. They're not really intended to deal damage, but I think it's okay if you want to play them like that and make them deal damage. Just a different way to potentially scale your build. Creeping Frost, medium buff to the hit, medium buff to the dot. Creeping Frost is normally not played as a hit skill, but you can play it as a hit skill because it shotguns, because it's a projectile AoE skill. It's not great at that compared to a lot of other spells, so I think it deserves a pretty hefty, like 50% more buff here. Or it looks like that's, yeah, exactly 50% more. Cremations, small to medium buffs. Cremation of Exhuming, pretty much doubling this to see if this is actually good enough, but basically at one geyser, it doesn't really feel like a usable skill. It doesn't deal enough damage. So you can double the geysers as opposed to doubling the effectiveness of that damage because you're generally doing corpse scaling and stuff like that. But anyways. See how this shakes out. I don't think this is too strong. The playstyle of Cremation is not for everybody, so I think in fact these other cremations could probably buff more. Cold Snap, 50% more dot, 50% more hit. Not much to say there. Cold Snap 50% more dot, and Cold Snap of Power 50% more hit. I'm a little afraid to buff Cold Snap of Power more than 50%. I actually think this is slightly less than 50%. But point being, with the Awakened Spell Cascade change that I would have here, I would be afraid to buff this too much because I don't know. I really like this skill, and I don't think you could ever make it too strong because it's just so inherently fair. But the skills that are cascadable, I'm going to be a little bit more apprehensive about buffing too much because that's already getting access to Awakened Spell Cascade is already a pretty massive buff, so I don't want to overdo it on these. Kraken Lance. This is probably by far the biggest buff that I've done yet. This is almost 80% more damage. This skill sucks. It just doesn't deal enough damage. It's really cool, but it just doesn't deal damage. The base Kraken Lance is going to get more damage per intensity, and then a big effectiveness bump like 50%, and then another like 30% or so from the more damage per intensity. Kraken Lance of Branching. This one, similar, massive buff, like 60% more effectiveness, but then also the quality is almost doubling the AoE. It used to be 20% more area of effect for quality. I would change it to 35% more area of effect. Just make it lean into what it's trying to do better. It's like the more AoE-centric version of Kraken Lance versus the damage one. And then similar to that, Kraken Lance of Disintegration. almost doubling the damage of this, but also giving a shocks enemies that's dealing 100% more damage. That's like what the skill's trying to do. It's trying to let you create a giant shocking beam, and shocking enemies at 100% more damage is a good way to do that without making the skill's effectiveness just like silly to use it for single target, because this gives you a maximum shock. This skill gives you a higher maximum shock effect with it, but to actually hit that, it's very difficult if you're not like an elementalist. So this shocking as though dealing 100% more damage would help with that. This actually might be able to be bigger and still relatively fair. Dark Pack, this is by far the most I've buffed a skill yet. This is over 100% effect. This is over 100% buff for using the skill with skeletons. So 60% more effectiveness, but also on top of that, we're gonna have like was that like another 50% on skeletons life there. Basically, I think Dark Pack's very bad, and it's probably one of the most interesting skills in the game. Really, it does something extremely weird that nothing else does. But nobody uses it because it doesn't deal remotely enough damage. I think this skill should actually probably be buffed more than this, but again, I'm going to try to not buff a skill more than 100% if I can avoid it. At least straight up effectiveness. Like I think this effectiveness could be 200% and then this changed and it'd still be not super used, because the playstyle is very strange, but it's very cool. So I don't know. Dark Path Tarthus, 60% buff, 60% more buff. God, how am I saying that? 60% more damage than what it did initially. And then removing the 50% less damage with the ailments penalty. I don't see why this skill has this. Using a skill 7 times and then getting like a big ignite is not going to be comfy for most people. So I don't think you should punish people for even trying to do that, unless this is here to prevent people from hurting themselves to try to do this. You know what I mean? Like to save them from themselves. But I don't really see a reason to have this. And then playing it as a poison is not also inherently unfair. This just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to be on the skill at all. Like it's already extremely niche. Don't make it even more niche. Desecrate, the biggest buff I will ever do to a skill gem. Basically multiply the dot by 12. Desecrate is not usable as a dot skill in the current game. It's a utility skill, but creates a caustic ground. I see no reason that it couldn't also be used in like some chaos archetype or something like that. It's just something like caustic arrow, but clunkier. I don't want to make it too strong, like make this like 7,000 or something ridiculous where you're forced to use something clunky like this, but I see no reason to not be able to use it that way. Discharge and Discharge Misery, doubling the damage. You have to jump through so many hoops to use these skills. They should deal way more damage than they do. Discharge should not be beaten by like self-casting a Bolt Lightning of Orbiting. That's just like fucked up. Like these skills need to do way more damage for what they ask you to do. Similar with Divine Ires, doubling the damage of all those pretty much. You have to stay on channel for a long period of time to deal damage with them, or to release a big ignite, or play them as a hit skill. They should deal way more damage for asking that much of you. Divine Retribution, similarly, doubling the damage of this skill. I don't want to. This is another one where I don't want to do too much on this, so people feel priced into using something they don't like playing. But this skill is very, very mediocre in the current state. It deals decent damage once you have access to Awakened Spell Cascade, but even then, with the playstyle, I think doubling the damage is totally fine. Ethereal Knives. Great scaling because they are Fizz skills and much loved Fizz skills. The play rate is much higher than the power level. I personally play EK way more than I should. I just love the skill. So because of how many people actually play them, I can't buff them too much. So splitting the buff somewhere on effectiveness and somewhere on the cast speed to make it so they're not just like great trigger options for skills that people already love playing. Ends up being about like a 50% more damage buff if you self-cast them. Where it's like only 25%-ish if you're triggering it. Essence Drain, doubling them, or doubling normal Essence Drain, and then giving a doubling the hit damage of Essence Drain Awakeness. This is the weird one where it's like Soul Rend Reaping, where it's just like a hit version of like a dot skill, and then making the dot like 60% more damage, and then Desperation a smaller buff because making it like 7,000 would be just truly ridiculous, but still quite a bit of damage. And I'm counting for the way that this is generally going to be used, because you can't trigger it yourself. You will literally die if you do that. So using it with trap support is already getting a buff in itself. So kind of keeping that in mind with this buff. Explosive Trap Magnitude. Could probably buff this more. Just a giant generic AoE skill. Not really much to say. It has less trap throwing speed, but it's just not remotely good enough. It is so much worse than the other explosive traps. I think it could probably stand to have a bigger buff than this, but maybe there's something cool you can do with it in Pale, since that is generic now, assuming I get my wish list on these patch notes. Exsanguinates, both just very small buffs to the dot and the hit. Exsanguinate Transmission, I don't even think you need to bother buffing the hit. It still doesn't deal any hit damage, really. But this skill is already decent just from its coverage standpoint, especially with something like mines. And yeah, I don't want to buff it too much. It's already quite heavily used. Eye Winner. I buffed this quite a bit. This skill is really strong, so I didn't buff it too much, but I don't think the playstyle is for everybody, so I want to overdo it because the skill is like mechanically not that fun to play, but the damage is crazy. I think it could be a skill you get much lower levels. That's like a great single target option you could use on something like Merveil, for example. Even though the cast speed's atrocious, that might feel pretty bad, but feel a lot of damage. The alternate quality Eye Winners are basically what if Eye of Winner wasn't so atrocious to clear with and it like traded a ton of the damage for that. So I doubled the damage of these. These could probably be buffed a little bit more than that, but yeah, that's where they're at. Maybe these effectiveness are too high, honestly, for what they do, because that's so weird. That makes them like decent ignite skills. Yeah, maybe these should be buffed with cast speed on some level, but then they're much worse with mines, which is fine because Eye Winner's already these skills are weird. They're very interesting skills because it's like they actually do have pretty decent coverage if you get like enough chains and splits on them and stuff. But I don't know. This is probably fine. Maybe add a more damage to it so it doesn't more hit damage. It's so weird just looking at these and then realizing these are good ignite skills now. That just doesn't make any sense because the coverage is too good for something like that. Maybe that's okay. Okay. Anyways, moving on. Fireball. You would think that I would just like basically double the damage of the skill, which I do think would be totally fine. But I think there's a problem with Fireball and that it's just not very interesting to use. Like Fireball actually is a not terrible ignite skill in the current game. Like if you just use it Fireball as a generic ignite skill, it's actually pretty decent. It just because it has good effectiveness, it has a more multiplier baked into it. At least I think it does, if I'm remembering correctly. But point is, it's decent at that. The problem is it's just not very interesting to use, and you can just like miss with it. But I think where Fireball could be interesting is if you made it a giant AoE, where it's like truly a growing fireball, like a fucking meteor coming out of your hands. So I gave it basically 50% more radius, and then gave the quality a bigger radius too, so you could scale it with various quality scaling effects to really make it massive if you wanted to, in addition to all the other AoE scaling. Because just imagine if you could just spew just 5 like giant fireballs at the screen. That just sounds kind of sick. Vol Fireball, like all the Vol spells, just kind of suck. So double the damage of that one. The Vol archetype is just hoping we can get enough bloodlines to buff this to make pure Vol builds like a thing again, because it is a very, very niche archetype. Okay, speaking of very niche archetypes, Flamethrower Trap. This got a massive buff. I also think this skill in general, like I would like to see the skill unlock at a much lower level, like maybe even at level 4 here. I think skills that are big cooldown like this are pretty ideal for low-level campaign leveling, because you basically are not going to be playing multi-button skills like this through the rest of the game, but early on you will always be doing this to try to get more damage where you can. So that having Flamethrower Trap do something like this would just give you more options early on. Like, is it so bad to have this to like kill a beefy rare, or to kill like something like Merveil, or just any of the early bosses? So it's just like a way to supplement your damage. I think more stuff like that is better. It especially opens up more archetypes, so you don't have to play like the best damage skill, because you can supplement with something like this. Back when especially when like you just have like low level linked skill gems, and it's a very interesting archetype. So as you unlock more like cooldown traps, you could actually play into it. It's maybe people realize it's pretty fun. Anyways, Freezing Pulse. I did not do a massive buff on the effectiveness of this skill, which I think it does definitely need if you don't do the mechanical changes I've proposed here. I think Freezing Pulse is in a really weird spot in that, well, in the current state of the game, I think it's just unusable. People use it with totems because you can get +2 proj from Rain of Splinters or whatever, but even then it's still not great. It has a huge damage penalty as it flies. After 50% of its flight, it loses 50% of its damage. But what's awkward about that is the skill is like no projectile speed baseline. It's like almost as bad as EK, where it just like has no coverage. The projectiles are very wide, which I think would be a cool way to lean into. Like that's why I have this here, where Freezing Pulse either gains an AoE tag or in some way scales with AoE, which scales the projectile width, because it's basically just firing giant cold beams. And then you could also have the galvanic arrow effect baked into it, where it says increase and reduction to proj speed also apply to AoE. I would do it at 50% value just so it's not so ridiculous. But then it also would add fires 2 additional projectiles when self-cast, because otherwise this would just be like a nuts trigger potential like clear build. So I think having the additional projectiles when self-cast is like pretty fair. And then if someone really wants to trigger this, they could add additional projectiles through harder to get ways rather than just like getting 3 baked in, because I think that might be too good. Yeah, I think the skill could fill a different niche than it does right now. What the niche it fills now is to not be used, but I think it could potentially have like some weird coverage, especially like and even thinking about like if the Nova support gets added in, you could just have like giant beams in every direction. Sounds really weird. Anyway, like some Cyrus Shards thing I played way back in the day. Frostbolt, also like a pretty big like 50% more effectiveness buff, but I also think it could potentially be considered as like another clear option, like where it says now deals 40% more damage for each enemy pierce. So it just like for each enemy it hits, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger damage. Frostbolt pretty much does keep going and going. Not super fast. He has a scale project speed to actually get like it to feel good, but Frostbolt does hit a lot, and I think it'd be interesting to make this instead of just being a utility skill that only exists to trigger Ice Nova, it could be its own thing, and I think this would help with that. Firestorm, pretty much all these not buffing a ton. They're already decent. These are on like the upper end of like playable spells. Flame Dash. I don't know that Flame Dash or Flame Dash Return should actually be buffed because mechanically they're not going to be fun skills to deal damage with. But I doubled the damage of Flame Dash and doubled the damage of the dot. I think, or not quite double damage, like 60% more damage on the dot. Flame Dash's dot, if it was decent, could be used as a way to supplement like low damage dot setups. I think there's definitely something there that you could do. Flame Dash or Return, basically give it 100% more damage, but through 50% more when repeating, so that initial hit doesn't deal as much, so you like lean into the repeating. It could be 50% more damage for each time it repeats, something like that to make it even bigger. But I think mechanically, if anybody's actually tried this skill, it feels so bad to actually use outside of like the niche application I think it has right now where it is to like reset Legion in 5 ways or something like that. But to actually use it as a damage skill, it is nauseating because like you'll use like Spell Echo with it because it'll like flick you forward, back, and then forward again. And that deals okay damage, but it's going to make you, at least for me, it's going to make me want to throw up. So, okay. Anyways, Flame Wall, I don't think the skill deals enough damage in the current game. I think it could easily get this like 50% more buff that I have here. Actually, yeah, that's about exactly what I have. And then just like a little bit more flat on the added projectiles through it. I think this is a really, really cool skill. It's just very simple, but it's just flat damage. It basically gives an Anger's amount of damage at level 20 for like playing your 2-button build or triggering this like flame wall that you trigger through. Pretty fair, honestly, for what it is. This is still not that much flat, but right now I think it's almost really hard. It's really hard to justify not using flame wall early in the league, and then it's pretty easy to justify not using it late in the league. And I think like having some justification actually using it, especially when you compare this flat to like what you get from other sources, it seems pretty fair. So I think minor buff there is fine. Not buffing the flame blast too much. Well, particular like giving like a medium buff to all the flame blast, but then a minor buff to flame blast of celerity because it's already decent. And then Vol Flame Blast is very niche in its use case, but it is very good at snapshotting big ignites, especially early in the league when you don't have like a 6-link or whatever, and you can just have 2 4-links. But yeah, these are already relatively usable, so I don't want to buff them too much. Frost Bomb, basically just doubling these. These skills are terrible. They are utility skills, but if you want to use them for damage, you never would because they don't deal enough damage. So just doubling the damage of all of them. Mechanically, you could maybe consider changing some of these, but I think Frost Bomb is going to get a minor buff from the Awakened Spell Cascade change, so maybe doubling them would be enough, because otherwise I think you would need to buff them more. They just don't. They're just not good enough. Forbidden Right, I'm a little afraid, like I guess just apprehensive in general, to buff skills that ask you to stack stats or like some kind of like defense, like life or ES. Like Forbidden Right, I'm only buffing it by like 33% with like the life scaling it has, but I'm just afraid to buff it too much more than that because you're already so incentivized to stack either life or ES in this game. So don't want to buff it too much, even though I think it probably could. Because Forbidden Right is very underused right now, but a lot of that is because of how good Soul Sacrifice is, especially when you can bypass the downside with the current neck that was just nerfed. Anyways, Flame Surge and Flame Surge Combusting, massive buffs. These skills aren't very good. Galvanic Field of Intensity, pretty much doubling both of these. Galvanic Field is probably one of the worst skills in the game right now. I think it could stand to be buffed more than this. Actually, thinking about it, I don't know why I only gave 80% more damage to Galvanic Field. It probably should get more than 100%. But it is an addition, like it's a skill that you use in addition to a build rather than the main focus of it. So maybe it doesn't need to be buffed that much more than that to actually see use. Glacial Cascade probably could double these, but I didn't do it too much because of the knockback changes. So I'm kind of curious to see if that's enough to actually make these usable. They're basically getting around 50% more damage, and we'll see if that's enough with the knockback changes into addition to that. Hexblacks and Hexblacks the Contradiction. Buff these by a minor amount, like a medium amount, like 50% more. But I removed the cooldown from it. Added cannot be supported by totems, traps, or mines, and then added back the spell's cast time and added to its cooldown time if triggered. Basically reverting the skill to what it was before it was made only usable with mines and then nowhere else. Because initially it was an interesting self-cast option, and then in its current state it's an interesting nothing because it just doesn't make sense to use because of the cooldown. You could maybe consider using it as an ignite skill, but outside of that, it's like, and that's already so niche on like how you would apply that. So trying to make it actually a usable skill again. It might actually need a cast time buff a little bit, but yeah. I think its initial use case was far more interesting than this is a skill you can use with mines and nothing else. And its current state is this is not a skill you can use. Hexblast of Havoc, pretty big effectiveness buff. I think this skill is actually pretty fun. It just doesn't deal really enough damage, but this hopefully will be enough to bump it up to playability. So it's pretty fun. You can scale the AoE pretty hard with the hex nodes, and then if more AoE gets added to the game, you could really make the skill really big and actually do something with that and have pretty cool coverage on a skill like this. Holy Flame and Holy Flame of Ire. Buffing Holy Flame Totem, a pretty large amount, and then doubling Holy Flame Ire, it's just inherently less strong, so I think that's totally fine. Ice Trap and Ice Trap of Hollowness, getting a solid about 50% more damage on these, a little bit less than that. I think these skills could be buffed more than that. They are not that strong. Where they are overrepresented is the fact that Ice Trap in particular is one of the best skills to one-shot Ubers with, just because you want to pick a trap, and then Ice Trap's one of the easiest traps to do it with because it's not over a delay. It's just all damage one time. So if you actually look at how many people use this skill to not Uber one-shot, it's very small. This is one of the least played spells in the game. So I think it could be buffed more than this, but it's overrepresented at that one case. And I don't think buffing it for that is inherently bad because that kind of setup doesn't really need more damage. This is not really going to move the needle in any way there, but it could actually make people consider using it as not any one-shotter. Massively buffing all of the Incinerates. Incinerate eventing is like getting more of a medium buff compared to the others because if you do like the Connor play style of play something that feels terrible to play but deals a ton of damage, it's it's decent at that. So I don't want to buff it too much, but the other ones are a lot more fair. So they're getting much bigger buffs comparatively. Ice Nova, I don't really know what to do with the skill because it is so simple and boring at what it does, but it used to be a skill that people would play, but now nobody uses it because it essentially doesn't deal damage. Like it has an effectiveness it used to have an effectiveness of 230, and then Ice Nova Frostbolts had an effectiveness of 190 when expanded off of, but it could hit 4 times. So it basically dealt 30% of an Ice Nova Frostbolts before like the last nerf where it can only expand from 2. So it's just like, man, this skill used to be so bad. It's like closer now. It's closer now because it's like this is like Ice Nova Frostbolts is 380 off both. So this is like 85%ish of that. But the difference is Ice Nova Frostbolts is insane with spell code because you don't actually have to do an animation for it. So, but anyways, this is trying to make it have a use case where it's just a big AoE. Like I add a little bit to the base radius, just another 0.3 meters, and then like a 50% more buff. Which is not crazy, and this might not be enough, but I don't think making this skill deal too much damage would be great if its AoE gets really big, just because it's just a giant circle that hits the screen if you could make it do that. Now, Ice Nova of Deep Freeze did a pretty drastic rework here. I don't know if this is necessary because I don't know if people actually play the game this way or would like to play this game this way. This is more of a PoE 2 coded thing, but I made the base radius 4 meters from 3.2, so it's like, quite a bit bigger. It's like a 25% AoE buff. And then I had it freeze enemies as though dealing 1,500 more damage rather than 490, so basically tripling that. And then I have the quality now providing 20% more cast speed. And the reason for this is basically the way you would want to use this is you would want to freeze the screen or a giant pack and then follow up with something else because that's what the skill is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a way that you can like CC the screen or some portion of the screen, right? So to lean into that made it just deal way more damage as though it froze, like not actual damage, just pretend like it deals, because its effectiveness is atrocious, so it needs to have something huge like this. Essentially, its effectiveness is so low now that it wouldn't be great at doing this anyway, so just make it a massive CC that you can actually try to lean into, because I don't think that's inherently unfair. I don't think a lot of people will play that play like that in PoE 1 just because the game is so fast. But for the people who want to, I think this would actually make that something they could consider. Val Ice Nova, over 100% buff on this. The skill is great at hitting the screen if it's dense enough, but the damage was so low that it's not going to kill much. So trying to make that actually make Vol skills great again. Ice Spear, small buff. This skill's already good. One of the better spells. Ice Spear is splitting. Almost doubled it, just a little bit under that. This skill is pretty bad. Its clear potential is pretty low because of how low its prod speed is, and you have to scale it pretty hard to actually make it do that. So basically, I baked in the additional splits you get from quality into the main skill, and then I added 0 to 40% prod speed to the quality. So you could make this skill a little bit better at doing what it's intended to do, because it's intended to just be like a decent clear skill, and I think it might need a little bit more. Like this prod speed might need to be baked into the skill, honestly, or something like that, because I don't think it's great at that right now. Icicle Mine, I don't think these skills, Icicle Mine or Icicle Mine of Fenrir, are very good, but people do use them, and they potentially have decent coverage. So I don't know. There are early league builds that you can do with Icicle Mine, which overrepresents its play rate. So just based on play rate alone, I don't want to buff it too much because it's already quite heavily used, but I do think it could be buffed harder than this. Lightning Conduit, not a terrible skill, usable build. Lightning Conduit, like if you just play like a Lightning Conduit build. So buffing this by just under 50%. And then Lightning Conduit of the Heavens, I'm basically doubling. This skill deals very, very, very little damage in its current state. Or I didn't double, it's like 60%. I don't know why my math's terrible there. But I would buff this skill way harder, but that's because I love this skill. So I'm trying to be reasonable and not just like shoot to the moon skills that I love. But so this is like, I think, a pretty reasonable buff because the skill has pretty decent potential coverage. So I don't want to buff it too hard because you don't want to buff skills that have insane clear too much because then they can do it all, right? Lightning Spire Trap, about 50% buff here. Also another skill that is available at level 12, like like Flamethrower Trap's available at level 4, so you could just like kind of build into the cooldown trap archetype as you level, or use either to supplement your damage if you're a fire build or lightning build, or both if you're trying to just do something like that. Yeah, I think this archetype, this cooldown trap archetype, probably needs a little bit more buff than what I'm providing here. Either like another wheel in the tree, cooldown trap, or advanced trap support buff in some way, or something like that. But it's a very interesting archetype, and it's one of the only like cooldown traps plays something like how grenades plays in PoE 2. There's just not really another archetype like it, so I would like to see it buffed to viability because it's just so much different than everything else. But yeah, Lightning Spire of Trap of Overloading, just massive buff. Lightning Spire of Trap of Zapping, massive buff. But all of these skills are not very good. Maybe buffed pretty heavily. Zapping doesn't actually have a cooldown, but the skill just doesn't hit very much, so it's still not very good. This might actually need to be buffed more than this. Anyways, Lightning Trap. These are decent, but they're not super heavily played because the damage is not there, even if the coverage is pretty decent. Buffing these by like around 60% more. Vol Lightning Trap, like most Vol skills, it sucks, so just doubling the damage of it probably could be buffed more than that. Lightning Tendrils, these are all pretty bad, doubling most of them, and then like 80% on a few of the ones that are a little bit stronger. Mana Bond, massive buff here, like another, well, not even massive, it's like 50% more buff, and this is because, again, it's inherently a stacking skill, so I don't want to buff it too much, but also, I think this one gets the buff from Spell Cascade. I think was one of the other reasons I was afraid to buff it too much. Just kind of see where the cascadable skills, I don't want to just like double the damage of. We'll see what Awaken Cascade does to them. And if they see a ton of use, you don't need to buff them further. If they see no use, keep buffing up. Overstorm's doubling hit damage of the skill. It's primarily used as a utility thing. I think this will make it a lot easier to shock things with it on non-elementalist, which is maybe something worth considering. Which will buff Lightning Conduit, but I think Lightning Conduit is not that strong right now anyway, so it's fine. But a utility skill that actually deals decent damage could be something people would consider. I don't know if they would, but I remember Orbistorms back in the day used to deal damage, and currently it does not. So I see no reason to not buff it. It's inherently a 2-button archetype, so not like inherently fair, I guess. Purifying Flames, about 50% more damage, and then bigger Consecrated Ground radius to make them better at being a utility for like healing. Essentially just make them better at utility and then give them like a 50% damage buff. So for people who are using them hit and then people using utility or some combination, better time doing both. Much like all their minion skills, I don't know shit about minions, so ignore everything I say, but I think the skill should just deal double damage. I don't think it needs to have a chance to deal double damage. It is so hard to actually use the skill outside of extremely specific Saboteur archetypes that I don't think are even stronger than something like Armor Recall, so I don't see why this skill couldn't do more damage. Just changing the quality to something mildly useful, giving it 20% increased area of effect. I don't know what else it can maybe do something else. Again, not a minion guy, but I do know the skill needs to be buffed. Ray Spectre. I assume GG does not want this archetype to be super playable, just based on how they've treated it over the years, because permanent minions are kind of fucked up. So I kind of understand that. People consistently complain about their specters dying all the time. So I was just thinking add 50% more life to them. But again, ignore everything I say about minions. I don't know shit about fuck. Reap, similar to Exsanguinate. This is already a decent hit skill. This is one of the best hit skills in the game, or one of the best hit spells in the game. So I don't buff the hit too much. Just giving it a small minor buff to compensate for buffing all the other skills, and then giving it a small dot buff. Because, well, I think I could buff the dot portion of it better. The Fizz dot archetype is so inherently strong and clear potential, especially with Corrupting Fever, that I don't want to do it too much. But maybe it's fine, because this does not, buffing the dot of Reap and Exsanguinate is not like buffing the clear potential of something like Kinetic Fever. Okay, or not Kinetic Fever, Corrupting Fever. Yeah, I got Wander skills in my mind. Okay, Rolling Magma. Very, very, very minor, like 10% more damage buff, because this is one of the hardest hitting spells in the game if you have a random directions effect, like either Nimis or Saboteurs, projectiles of fire in random direction, because you can hit with all of the skill, like all of the chains on it, making it like a 1600 effectiveness skill, which is absurd. So I am buffing the cast time of the skill, and now just a level 28 gem, because literally one of the first things you'll see in every YouTube comment about leveling with Rolling Magma, if a new player sees that, or not even a new player, if any player sees that, they'll be like, log out. Just like, nobody wants to level this way. It feels awful. So hopefully the leveling meta gets shaken up more, so people don't have to keep using Rolling Magma, because nobody likes doing it. Love playing in late game. It's a really cool skill mechanically, but leveling with it as one with a single smelly projectile does not feel very good. Searing Bond, I think the skill could probably be doubled, but the playstyle is so silly that I don't want to do it too much, and maybe we'll play something they hate. So giving it a pretty massive dot, but a little bit under doubling it. Shock Nova, this is getting like a 80% buff, I think, or like 70%. I'm just giving it a massive buff. Shock Nova, very rare skill. But since it has that guaranteed shock built in, if I change the effectiveness too much, triggering it would be a great way for people to get really fat shocks into the build. But I guess Crackle Lance and Disintegration can do the same thing. So I don't want to buff the effectiveness of it too much. So buffing the cast time really massively. Like most of the buff for the damage is going to be coming from the cast. Shockwave Totem, not a super strong skill, but has great scaling and is really good for hitless runs in Sanctum, and I assume that's how it will continue to be played. I don't want to buff it too much, because it already sees pretty heavy use there. I don't know if it currently does, but I know that's what it was for a while. Soul Rend, doubling the hit damage of it. I don't know why someone wants to play this as a hit, but this would let them do that, or at least consider it. Pretty massive dot buff, like about 50% more dot. I think this skill doesn't deal a ton of damage right now, and the generic spell dot archetype is not super strong at all, so not going to really hurt doing too much. Soul Rend of the Spiral is getting a smaller effectiveness buff, like for the damage, just because this is one of the better spells to deal hit damage with if you can jump through all the hoops, which is basically can you get returning projectiles in your build, which is either be a Saboteur or have enemies. So it's pretty restrictive, because using returning projectile support means it's not really worth doing this. So it's a pretty late game thing, but I don't want to buff it too much to make it too good at that role. So that's why this is getting buffed that it is. Just also big, similar, actually the exact same dot buff that Soul Rend's getting. Soul Rend Reaping, not a huge buff, like 60% more damage. It's already sees a decent amount of use, I think much higher than it should, but yeah. Spark is just, it's really weird with these. Like, there are spells that I would buff more or buff less, but if I look at the play rate of a spell that's seeing like a decent amount of use or not a lot of use, it's going to influence how I buff them, despite, I don't know. That's probably that's how GGG balances, so I don't want to steer too far from that. Basically, if a spell is not seeing use, I think it can be buffed a lot bigger than if like a skill's already seeing use. Like, I think this could be buffed bigger, but again, it's people use it, so. Much like Spark, Spark I think is actually pretty decent, but it is one of the most potentially broken spells in the game, so it's scary to buff it too much. So it's giving a very, very minor buff of this, just because if I'm making all the other spells like deal some amount of damage, I need to buff this like a very small amount. I could leave it in the same, but it would basically stop seeing use. It just wouldn't deal enough damage. I think this might be too low, but if people are eventually going to play Spark anyway, just like Tornado Shot. the potential of the skill is just far too high for people to ignore. So don't want to buff it too much because of how inherently broken it is with enough money. Vol Spark, doubling the damage of it. Vol skills suck. Bring them back. Spirit Offering, just basically Bone Offering is the good offering, and the other ones are just okay and can be buffed. Just giving this more crit multi. Crit minions is not, as far as, again, I don't know shit about minions, is not super common archetype, but this will buff that, and then buffing using offerings on yourself. This one is very weak for offering on yourself. This might be stronger on minions, but I'm unsure. Maybe this is too much, but I highly doubt it. Stormcall, Jesus, these skills are so bad. Vol Stormcall especially is so bad. Lowering the soul gain prevention time in this one to maybe bring the archetype back of permanent Vol Stormcall, where you just use this to clear. Something that has not happened in like 8 years or however long since that was a build, back when staffs were playable for spells. Anyways, Stormcall, I didn't buff it quite double it just because, like, I gave this one like a 50% more buff just because I want to see how Awakened Spell Cascade Chain shakes out. Stormcall Tarthus, about a little bit under doubled this. Like I think gave it like 70% more damage. Very underutilized skill. It can go into the Fizz archetype, but it's like it's like a third skill for that, but it just gives them another option for it because this one's quite weak. Stormless Mine, small buff, usable utility skill, but basically giving it 50% more damage. A little bit less than 50% more damage, make it maybe considerable. It's like a main build. Stormbrand and Stormbrand of Incision, doubling the damage of these. Stormbrand, this is not enough. I don't think it's enough damage to make Stormbrand playable, honestly, which is crazy to say. But Stormbrand, much like Spark, is scary to buff too much because the playstyle is so comfortable if it deals enough damage. So kind of see how this shakes out. We'll see if this is actually enough to get people to use this skill. Stormbrand is one of my favorite skills in the game. I would love to make this like triple damage. Just be happy as a clan playing Stormbrand, but it's a little iteration there. But yeah, it doesn't deal enough damage in the current game. It needs to be massively buffed. We'll see if this is enough to make people actually consider using it. It basically got nerfed because of Archmage forever ago and then never recovered. And then Stormbrand of Incision was good for a single league and then got completely dumpstered the following league because it was Stormbrand's not allowed to be good, I guess. But yeah, I wanted to see if Stormbrand could be considered playable again without making it dominate the league like it has so many times when it's good in the past. Make it usable early and great late game without making it like conquer every part of the game like it used to over the years. So balancing the skill is a nightmare. Stormburst, double the damage. Playstyle is so fair. There's just no way this is not a reasonable thing to do. This alongside the decay buff, make decay better. No, it doesn't even change it because it doesn't give the more multiplier bigger. Okay, never mind. But yeah, Stormburst, so fair. There's just no way this is like gonna cause any problems. Same with Stormbind. Two of the only skills that I just like over doubled the damage of because it's like, let people play this archetype. Like, why does this not deal? Stormbind doesn't deal bad damage right now. It deals okay damage, but if you do like really weird combination of having one Stormbind that costs no mana and one that costs a lot of damage, then you essentially blow it up with one of the skills and then cast with the other one. But that weird ass playstyle, just let these people deal more damage. Like, come on, like Stormbind's like so weird. Just let them blow shit up. Seismic Trap as well as the skill kind of sucks. I don't know if it needs to be reworked, but it doesn't hit very many times, and yeah, it had an effectiveness like it did, but it doesn't. So doubling the damage of the skill. Seismic Trap, not buffing too much, giving it like a medium, like 40 to 50% more damage buff because the playstyle of Seismic Trap is so fucked up for bossing that it's kind of scary to buff it too much because it could just dominate the league again. So just keeping it reasonable here. Terminative Elemental Turbulence, giving this a small buff because I'm giving a massive movement speed buff. This skill, once you have enough movement speed on the tornado, feels really good. And it's like a weird playstyle if you can't have too many out. It's like an orbs. I guess it's literally an orb skill, like cremation or whatever. So you can't have too many out. But early on the progression, before you have access to a lot of things to give it additional quality, it just feels really slow and clunky. So I'm trying to alleviate that and make it just like an interesting skill that you can consider using earlier, where it starts at 60% movement speed as opposed to 0. So essentially get 60% movement speed baked in. Voltaxic Burst, pretty massive change in this one. So basically giving this skill about 100% more damage or not 100%. It's like 70% more damage because it's getting other weird buffs. So like I'm changing the lightning conversion from 40% to 60%. This skill converting 40% of its damage to chaos is terrible. It just makes the skill worse in its current state of the game because it's like you can't scale both of those very easily. Lycia Bloodline like helps out a little bit, But so essentially making this convert 60% of its damage, and then I added a lightning mastery to the tree that says convert 40% of your lightning damage to chaos. So you could finish the skull off if you wanted to. Adding the Voltaxic effect where it says chaos damage can shock, like Voltaxic Rift has. Is there another Voltaxic effect that does that? Anyways, but yeah, this like that doesn't seem super unfair. The skill's effectiveness is not crazy. That's not going to break anything, break the bank or anything, and it will just make it easier to scale if you convert all to chaos. Because if you convert everything to chaos, then essentially you can't shock, which makes skill significantly worse, which I don't think you should make the skill worse. Lowering the base duration, you could lower it even further, but I want to keep the option for scaling duration for actually maximizing the damage there without lowering the base duration too much. So if you lower it really low, it'll feel better, but it will ruin that avenue of scaling that is baked into the skill if you give the base duration too little. Vortex, just 50% more hit damage, like 40%, 30 to 40% more dot. The cold dot archetype is okay because of Wintertide Brand. I don't want to buff it too much. Vortex protection, very small buff because all the other spells are buffed, but again, very, very tiny buff. The skill does not need to be buffed very much. Winter Orb, small buff, skill, much like Spark, much like Stormbrand, is scary to buff too much. It could potentially dominate a league if it's too good, so just a minor buff here, make it more usable without making it busted. Wave of Conviction, minor buff, good utility skill, decent ignite skill early on in league. Don't want to buff it too hard. It's already extremely heavily used, especially early in league. Wintertide Brand, minor buff as well, like 30-35% more damage. Again, Cold Dark type, basically carried by Wintertide Brand. I don't want to buff it too much. It's already really comfy playstyle and truly passive, good boss damage. So, well, acceptable boss damage. But if you make it too good, it's going to be too good at, I guess, every part of the game, whether clearing and then combination of bossing. So, okay. Anyways, last one here, Unearth. So giving this a 50% more hit damage, you can technically play hit Unearth with like Fledgling and some weird combination of shotgunning, not colliding at close range, if you are so inclined, which is not going to be the most comfortable skill. But then the big change is the quality now providing 30% increased maximum life as opposed to 0 to 20% that it used to have. So this is basically unnerfing it. And the reason I think that's fine is because of the Spectre nerfs that happened to corpses like 2 leagues ago, like 3 leagues ago. I think this is pretty fair. I think this number could be buffed up a little bit higher, but maybe just see how this goes before we like accidentally make a corpse skill too good again. I don't think this will, but yeah, essentially corpse skills have had enough nerf with the way specters and corpses interact that I think this is totally fine to do. It could be a little bit higher. The only spell gem, like hit spell that I listed here that needs a complete rework is Blade Vortex of the Scythe. This skill's damage got doubled and the duration got doubled last league, which I think made the skill even worse. I don't know. It's really weird. I'm not sure how you ever make this skill function because of the way it. Well, I guess because of the way it functions. Essentially, you can't scale the cast time too hard, or you don't get the double hit on it. If you don't get the double hit on it, the skill's terrible. To get the double hit, you have to like have a really weird combination of duration and cast speed, which is so difficult to actually do. It's like Kinetic Fusillade. If Kinetic Fusillade was terrible and not busted, yeah. So I don't know what you do with this skill, because you can't make it so like you can't have. Because if you just make it so it always hits twice regardless of the duration, then it's just a really good skill. But it's also uninteresting. So I don't know how you fix the skill without making it, I don't know, just good and then uninteresting. So you just make it like a hit skill that has no scaling vector, then it's just basically bad reap, or good single target, even better single target reap somehow. I don't know. Okay, so God, I feel like I talked for like 6 years. There is so much to go through, you guys. That's like I don't even. I guess I can just at least go through the damage auras and then the utility skills, and then I can go through like the remainder on like a future video. Maybe make that 2 additional videos. But like I mentioned in the beginning, I think the damage aura skills, like the offensive auras, are pretty bad. Anger being the most heinous of all of them, and then followed by Zealotry, where these skills are just basically not used, and if they are, you're really sad that you have to use them. Which is funny because I actually use Anger a lot early to balance Trinity, but I don't like that I do that, and it feels terrible to do because Anger is so little damage. But yeah, and then Hatred, ever since the rework where it lost its more cold damage, has been extremely underutilized. And I don't even say underutilized; it's just underpowered. It's a little scary to buff the auras too much because of things like aura bots or self aura bots, but basically, these skills are all extremely underutilized, and I think they could be buffed to a point of where they're actually decent again. And then the Heralds, I'm just doubling the damage that they deal, not the double damage of the buff effect. I assume that might actually not directly be nerfed, but the Lycia buff effect might change. So essentially, these skills didn't deal damage themselves. The only way to actually make these skills clear was to get some weird way to make all damage shock or freeze, like something like ward stacking or not replica Elbrons. There's various ways to actually make this happen, like especially like with Surfcaster where you can make like all their damage crit and stuff like that. But it's really hard to actually use these skills to utilize like what they were initially, I guess, made for is like to supplement your clear. They almost don't do that ever now outside of like really weird things. So I'm trying to fix that a little bit to bring them back in line. I don't know if this is enough to do that. This is basically, I don't even know if I think I doubled them because I did this as like a meme because it's like that's what it basically felt like. But yeah, see if this is enough and then they could be buffed again. These skills have not been buffed in like 10 years. Like their the damage that they deal, which is funny because like Monster Life has like gone up so much since these skills last got buffed. So it's just like they've just been getting worse and worse and worse. Like what Herald of Ice, how much damage do you have to add to this thing for to make him kill a white mob in a T17 map? I don't know, but it's a lot. Herald of Agony, I think it's far too hard to get poison chance capped on the tree, and especially on spell archetypes. So making this 40% chance to poison on hit from 20%, used to be able to get this pretty easily with the alternate quality version of this in what's it called? In Heist before that got removed. You used to get the 40% chance Herald of Agony. And now it's just 20% one, but it's very hard to get that remainder amount with having to use Chance of Poison, which is a terrible support. So I don't see any reason for that to be so difficult. Using Herald of Agony already feels really bad. It's just a bad aura, so it's a bad use of your mana. So I think it's a pretty fair buff, honestly. Wrath, much like the other defensive auras, these aren't good enough. So buffing this one slightly less than the other ones because it is better comparatively to the other offensive auras because lightning is inherently better. But outside of that, not buffing it crazy. I'm not buffing any of these crazily just because, again, aura scaling could make them too good. So they're all getting like a 25% buff, but because of aura scaling, that's more than it seems. Let's just go over the utility skill gems before I call it a day. Dash. I want to make the skill basically something you consider using over Frostblink or Flame Dash in some scenario. I don't know what the scenario is. I don't know when you would consider it. But Dash used to be a usable gem before Second Wind got nerfed and then Dash got nerfed and then the Helm Enchant for Dash got removed. It's like basically like all these different things gutted Dash around the same time that I will frequently just not even use Dash if it's my only option, and I will wait till level 6 on like Ranger that I can get enough int to put on Frostblink because it feels so bad and is just so useless compared to the other Blink skills. I don't know if we make that fixed by giving it distance, like I think that was what the Helm Enchant did. I don't even remember at this point. Giving it more charges, giving it much lower cooldown, or just like something to make it actually justifiable. Because right now it's not. So let's fix that. Hydrosphere. I mean, you could use this as a damage skill. It's a really cool, chunky feeling skill, but it just doesn't deal damage. This one could probably be buffed more than this, but again, use it in combination with other skills generally, so you don't want to buff it too much. Smoke Mine. This was completely dumpstered because of racing. And I think it was removed. It was made so bad that it was just like never considered in racing. And now you just don't use it and this skill doesn't exist. So I think maybe bringing it back somewhere. It's possible that this makes it too heavily used in the campaign. But if that's really a concern, you could make this like a 34 unlock skill gem, which I think is silly to do if you really want to nerf like the 10 people that actually race like in the campaign. But if you did want to do that, you could make it a much higher level. But I think this is an interesting skill and feels kind of comfortable to use. It's like so much weirder than the other movement skills. So I don't know. I think it's a nice addition to have as an option in the game as opposed to it not like its current state. Steel Skin. It feels really bad to be in the squishy parts of the tree, also known as the right side of the tree, where you can't use you have to use like either a low level Immortal Call or somehow get like an additional like 80 strength to put on a Steel Skin. I think Steel Skin could be a pure dex gem or like a strength dex hybrid like I have it here to make it more reasonable for characters that can't scale armor really hard that would use Molten Shell because Molten Shell is strictly better once you have enough armor, or endurance charges making Immortal Call. Immortal Call is fine without endurance charges, but it's great when you do have them. So then it's like right side of the tree, you're left to low level Immortal Call or getting a ton of strength for Steel Skin, where I think we could make Steel Skin's already worse than the other guard skills. So I think making it easier to use is probably a decent option. Tempest Shield. I don't know why you'd want to play this as a hit skill, but it deals very bad damage, so I think it should at least be doubled. You can do weird stuff with Tempest Bell with it now. Monastery Bell with it. But yeah, I think doubling the damage would be totally fine. Probably could get a little bit higher than this. Yeah. Void Sphere. I want to rework this to actually be usable. I don't know if this is necessary because again, in PoE 1, the game is so fast that it's so hard to justify actually playing skills like this. But I think if you make the pulse happen immediately when it comes out, as opposed to like waiting to tick like it does right now, it'll feel significantly snappier. Completely remove the cooldown so you can actually use it as like a pull skill. Make the base radius 5.5 meters, which I think almost doubles the base radius, because that's how you want to use it. You want to use it as a screen wide or like almost screen wide pull effect to pull enemies to you for skills that have terrible clear, like some like strike skill or something. And then now this quality scales the pull effect as well to make it even higher if that's necessary. Like some combination of this to basically make it a usable skill for what it should be used for. Like you can use it in things like Delve or like some kind of corpse removal in extremely niche scenarios, but I think it could actually be like a usable skill for skills that have terrible clear, which would be like the first pull effect in PoE that's like actually good as far as I know. And that literally opens up archetypes. So could be a really cool change. How much it will see use, I don't know, but it definitely, I don't know. Like if I was playing like Glacial Hammer, I could totally see using Void Sphere or something that has like dual strike of ambidexterity. I could consider using Void Sphere if I could truly get it to screen wide status. Anyways, something cool. Void Sphere of Rending, this should be up in the spell hit. I need to move that. But anyways, not quite doubling this, just giving it a solid like 50% more damage. Passive skills, it's hard to buff too much because you can throw down a bunch of them at one time to create an archetype like that where you just have like good passive boss damage. But yeah, I love this skill. I would buff it more if I could because I just enjoy playing it. But I think it's a pretty fair buff. Wall of Force. This skill might be one of the spells I was most excited about and then most disappointed with when I actually used. It feels really bad in practice to actually use the spell. I don't know if it got buffed from when Ziggy D was playing it to like it going live, but it has so many cannot like PoE 2 coded like words on it to like prevent you from doing fun stuff with it that it's just like you're already putting down like some nonsense. It's like I don't know. I think a lot of the conditionals could be removed from it if they don't want to just buff it some other way. Like the fact that projectiles cannot do any behavior from colliding with it just feels terrible because it's like it basically deletes essentially projectiles that go into it basically just get deleted because it's like one will chain, but it's like that's not really going to be good damage anyway. So it's just like removing the rest of this. I don't know. Like having one chain off of it and not do the other behaviors would be fine, but it's basically like you can't really use this outside of exactly single target, and then on an exactly single target you have to position it perfectly for it to actually make sense, and then have time to do it, and then have the cooldown up. It's like already such a restrictive skill that it could be more fun, but it's like maybe it's just too hard to balance to make it where it's not broken. So I understand why it released the way it did, much like what Wall of Frost did in early PoE, and then what Wall of Frost did a bunch more times in PoE 2. It's like skills like this are inherently hard to balance because they're just so easy to break. So maybe it's okay, but I would like to be excited to use this skill again. All right, like a billion more things to talk about in the next video. Oh my god, I gotta go to bed. All right, poops and butts out.